I'm wearing a mask. Anyway, so it's an honor for me to introduce our keynote speaker today. I've known this guy for quite a while. In fact, kind of worked with him a little bit when he was in industry. Today it's going to be Dr. Erik Sapper. He is his assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo. He has a PhD in Coatings and Polymeric Materials from North Dakota State University. Erik's research focuses on autonomous and computational-driven discovery of new materials for coatings applications and polymeric materials. Erik's work has been published in the Journal of Coatings Technology and Research, Progress in Organic Coatings, Applied Surface Science, Corrosion Science, and Materials and Design, in addition to multiple book chapters and international patents. His work on modeling, performance prediction, and design of new coatings materials test methods have resulted in 2 Roon Awards and 1 Gordon Award from the American Coatings Association. Erik is passionate about creating industrial and entrepreneurial project opportunities for students. He encourages interdisciplinary entrepreneurship for students across the Cal Poly campus community by serving as a faculty fellow in Cal Poly's Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And I just want to say one thing to just show how innovative this guy is. About 2 years ago, I was at a party with Dr. Ray and with Erik, and the power went out. And he came up with a great idea. Let's empty these beer bottles and put candles in them and use the candles for light until the thing went out. So anyways, it went very
squeaky up here. Thank you, Larry, for that kind introduction. I'm going to move that out of the way. All right, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here in person. My last business trip was in December 2019. That seems like a lifetime ago, right? So it's nice to be traveling again, seeing familiar faces, getting to stand on stages and tell stories. How many of you drove in from California and drove past these painted rocks, right? Pretty cool. How many of you then immediately started thinking about the paint on those rocks, right? What sort of resin was on there? Are they using hinder to beam light stabilizers? I wonder if I could fit my gloss meter on one of those rocks, right? To take a gloss measurement. That'd be a great place to do exposure testing, right? So it just reminded me, how prevalent coatings are and how no matter where you go, you see examples of coatings around the world and on the things we touch and see and interact with. So today I want to talk to you about technology, innovation, education, and how those all come together, and from my perspective, how that's advancing and changing our field. Now, in case Larry's introduction wasn't enough, in case you don't know what you're in for, right? This was posted on LinkedIn the other day. I see charismatic educator. Thanks. To me, that kind of sounds like code, right? You kind of don't know what you're going to get. The hair might be wild. There will be elbow patches. There might be a lot of voice modulation, a lot of posing, right? So we'll see if I can deliver, right? We'll see if I can deliver. When I was approached by the board to give this keynote talk, of course I said yes right away, and then I had to think about, well, what would I talk about, right? So I have to appreciate and give thanks to Ray Fernando, who pulled me aside and said, don't make it all about machine learning, right? You're an educator, talk about education. So it's going to be kind of a mix today of various topics that I think are of relevance to the industry. Now let's begin where all good keynote presentations begin. That's royalty-free clip art. Royalty-free clip art, right? I love this picture, right? Because who among us has not taken a reaction vessel and then poured it into a much larger volumetric flask without a funnel, with loose baggy gloves, and with no safety glasses? Right? We've all been there, right? A typical day job of a chemist. But this proves, this is a laughable picture to us. I think in our lifetimes, this sort of role of a chemist is going to go away. I think it's going to be replaced by robots and automated systems. And when we're talking to our grandchildren in 40, 50, 60 years, or they're talking to their grandchildren, they won't know what this job was. It will seem artisanal. It'll be at Renaissance fairs. Yeah, we used to do these distillations by hand. Right? I remember doing a titration by hand. Right? So if robotics and automation are taking over the industry, how do we best prepare ourselves for that? And if you don't think it's happening, how many of you have walked through the Planet Hollywood shops so far on this trip, and you walk past the Tipsy robot? Right? It's just, you can go right now. They're probably open right now. Right? You can have a robot make a drink for you. But of course, you have to create the drink yourself. Right? So that's kind of a theme. You can spend a lot of money on automation, but you still need people to do the creation and the innovation and the ideation. Right? So knowledge of chemistry is not going to go away. We still need to teach people how to learn chemistry and how to do chemistry. Now, just to drive home the point, if you think these KUKA robots are only good at making drinks, here's the same robot with a rotary bell applicator used to paint. Right? And because we all get a little kick out of the schadenfreude of walking along the strip, let me clue you into the saddest person on the strip. Can you guess who the saddest person on the strip is? It's the one human bartender who has to work there. Right? He's like a modern day John Henry. Only instead of building railroad tracks, he's trying to mix drinks. It's such a shameful position, they blur out his face on the webpage. Right. So, automated robotic science is happening. Here's the first robotic scientist named Eve. This woman here is actually a postdoc. Eve is the robot, right? Eve screens candidates for drug applications and drug trials. Eve makes its own learning models, and then Eve finds lead compounds to move forward to clinical testing. And yes, there is an Adam. There's Adam and Eve, the two first robot scientists. Right? Some of you have these Automation Advantage series emulsion polymerization reactors that have automatic feedback loops built in. So you can set a reaction and walk away and be pretty confident that the reaction is going to proceed the way you want it to. There's a lot of handmade, cheap, high-throughput combinatorial apparatuses on the market. There's a niche area in academic publishing, which is here. You can build an electrochemistry robot for $100 if you buy the right parts and you have a little bit of maker know-how and you can 3D print some pieces. If you're really into 3D printing, you can 3D print entire reactor systems that are custom made for the reaction pathways that you're interested in. So this stuff is cheap, and it's happening more and more quickly. So what's driving change in our industry? Well, there's always a need for better and new materials. And better doesn't mean much to us, but better means something to our customers. They want it better, they want new, they want it cheaper, and for us, for me specifically, for my students on the research side, that means we have to do research faster, and for a lot of companies, that means they have to qualify their materials faster. You have to do it with less money, less expenditure, and you want to keep those margins as wide as possible. So what I'm going to be talking about today are the two different angles that I look at this problem. How can we do this better? And how can educators train students to do this so that they're ready to help out industry when they join right out of school? So let's start with us here in industry. How do we accelerate the field? Right? There's a handful of ways that really stick out to me. Tighter integration between the marketing and technical arms of an organization. Improved data management and digital workflows. There's a couple really good talks in this program about those topics, which I encourage you to attend. Service life prediction and test protocol optimization. If you're qualifying materials to get on a qualified product list, you know the battery of tests you have to run can be challenging. So what's the best way to arrange those tests? What's the best way to foresee where your material is going to fail or have a good chance of failure so you can hit that weakness in the R&D phase? Incorporation of numerical methods, statistics, and machine learning, that's inevitable. I'll show you some examples of that. I know a lot of people are already working in that area. I'd like to take it a step further in my research and look at optimization of materials as a way to amplify our current chemical intelligence. So not necessarily artificial intelligence, but intelligence amplification, using these tools to make us better at the science we do. So I'd like to show you a few examples of this. A lot of examples that my students actually helped me with. So the first is data management, and specifically the incorporation of natural language processing or NLP toolkits into our workflows. How many of you at your organizations have stacks and stacks of dusty, old year-end reports? There's good data in there. There's historical legacy data in there, but it's not encoded in any way that you can do anything with now. If you're lucky, it's buried on OneDrive, right? But you still have to sift through those old PDFs to extract that information. If you have to read journal articles like I'm expected to do, good luck, right? How hard is it to stay on top of the scientific literature as it comes out? So a good challenge in the field right now is how to train computers to do that reading for us and to extract important experimental information for us so that we can focus on distilling that information and making predictive models with it. So this paragraph here is just a dummy paragraph of what might be a simple formulation procedure in a paper. What my students have done is they've developed some tools that will take that paragraph, they'll extract out the meaningful information, and then the program itself will tag the different parts of language so that we know what's a solvent, what's an additive, what's a polyol, how do these things need to get mixed together in the formulation. And we can incorporate that into a larger material development workflow. So you have your corpus of material, right? Your body of literature that you have sitting at your desk and in your database, technical data sheets, journal articles, internal reports, and so on. You use these NLP tools to extract the meaningful information. Sometimes you will create an actual set of directives for a robot. You'll send this information to a centralized database, and then automated synthesis and formulation and product testing can occur. So you're trying to remove some of the think work involved in just reading literature and extracting data from tables and paragraphs. Something that I really like to think about is if I have to run a lot of tests, which tests take a real long time? When do we run them? What's the order that we run them in? And can we predict the outcome? Now, my favorite example of this, thanks to my time in the aerospace industry, is B117 salt fog testing. Oh, it's everybody's favorite accelerated test. I heard once it's the world's most inefficient test for the presence of hexavalent chromium. I really like that. Right. This test takes 1,000 hours just to get a reading, right? And most readings fail. Now, my favorite, I have a lot of weird hobbies, right? I like to do crossword puzzles, I like to juggle. I also love to look for pictures of people opening up a salt spray chamber mid-test. Right? There's a pause button. But these people don't like to hit the pause button. They just open it up and get the face full of salt fog. Right? If you are in this room and you've ever had to pose for one of these pictures, especially if it was under duress, please come talk to me. I want to hear your story. And you think I'm joking, I can just do this all day. Right? They're all over the place. Right? They're all over the place. Right? So this test is just terribly inefficient. I realized why these pictures exist is because this is the most exciting part of the test. If you're lucky enough to open it when you're not supposed to, and you get blasted by a salt spray, you feel like you've been at the beach all day. Right? So how can we apply some intelligence to this? Well, I call it, let's predict the outcome of boring tests. Salt spray in the face not included. Right? So if you know a little bit about droplet dynamics and some basic physics of how droplets roll down surfaces, it doesn't take a lot of work before you can set up a simulated salt spray test. Right? Using finite element analysis and some chemical equations, you can set up a simulated salt spray test where every step of the test actually looks at whether you have electrolyte solution on your scribe. And it also looks at whether or not that electrolyte solution is connected to the coating. So corrosion inhibitor might diffuse out and neutralize that scribe, or whether it's just wet but not connected to the coating, in which case you have a free corrosion cell. Right? So we can run this simulation and we can come up with predictions like the daily rate of pit depth as a function of time. So we can put in our coating formulation, we can put in the electrochemical information about our coatings, and we can predict when we will get failure before we actually put these panels in test. So we can assess how severe this test might be. Is it a test we want to get out of the way early and spend our resources on, or is it a test that we want to wait until the very end until we get some other qualification data in place? We can extend this, right? We can extend this. If we know how corrosion happens, we can extend this to environmental conditions. So we can look at different products, different coatings, let's say, for example, on airplanes that are flying different routes. So these are two airplanes these are real routes. This is real service data from airplanes in Australia. You have airplane 1 and you have airplane 2. And you can run this simulation over and over and over, and you can calculate the probability of getting a corrosion pit that gets above a critical threshold. So you can have predictions for in-service performance. And you see that airplane 1 is much more likely to get a critical pit before airplane 2. Can you see why that might be, looking at the different flight paths? Well, airplane 1 goes to Tasmania every now and then. And crossing that vast strait is very choppy. A lot of whitecaps, a lot of aerosolized chloride floating above the ocean, which tends to drive corrosion at regular intervals. So fascinating what you can do when you start to pull together different pieces of data with a little bit of chemical know-how. We've had some good success doing this backwards. So if you know how materials will perform in service, you can run the math backwards to look through large databases of molecules, hundreds of millions of molecules, to find organic molecules that might work as decent corrosion inhibitors. And you can experimentally validate your prediction by doing electrochemical tests. So it's a good way to combine multiple length and time scales if you're trying to predict material performance or discover new molecules. Now, how does this work in practice? Well, in practice, you don't actually want to do 100 electrochemical tests. It's grossly inefficient, right? So working with collaborators, we built this robot. You knew a robot was coming back, right? This is the fast autonomous screening test for electrochemical response that we built with collaborators in Australia. It's a robot that does electrochemical testing for you in this grid of wells. So you connect that to your predictive models, you train your models, you get better and better prediction as you run more and more tests. And it just takes one person, that John Henry of electrochemistry, to monitor the robot's performance. Now, my students have been helping me take this a step further and actually considering what a genome of polymer materials, what a genome of a formulation might look like and what that would allow us to do. You could imagine taking a polymer or taking a polymerization reaction or even taking a formulation and encoding that as a string of binary variables, a string of zeros and ones. And the order of the strings and ones might represent different reaction conditions. It might represent a different order of operations when you're mixing components in a formulation. It might represent different copolymer ratios or different monomer reactivity ratios. However you slice it, it represents what you did in the lab that day. And if we allow genetic operations like crossover and mutation to occur, well, we can come up with a simulated environment where we are letting our materials, we are letting our experiments evolve in a way that's very, very similar to Darwinian evolution. The problem with traditional predictive methods is that it doesn't allow for serendipitous discovery. Right? And we're all good scientists. We know that you need serendipitous discovery to make those great discoveries. You accidentally leave your petri dish by the window and you come back and it's fuzzy. That's not what I wanted to do. But now here's this fuzzy thing. What happens if I eat it? Right? I think that's how biologists do that stuff. I don't know. So incorporating crossover and mutation into this evolution allows for this serendipitous discovery of new science or new ideas. And how this works looks something like this. It's a loop. It's a loop. So you start with a population of materials. This could be 100 different polymers. It could be 100 different formulations. Sometimes it could be 10,000 different formulations. It could be 100,000 different formulations. They're hypothetical. They're hypothetical. That's your random population of starting materials. You calculate the fitness for each of those materials. That means you predict how well that material will work. What will its gloss look like 7 days after cure? What will its performance in B117 be? Right? What will its DOI be? What about color change? What about brittleness? What about last transition temperature? You predict those variables, and you start to rank these things. Of my 10,000 candidates, which 100 are best? So I'll take those 100, I'll throw away all the rest, and then I'll begin to breed and mutate those 100 best materials. And I'll see if I don't get something really good and interesting coming out of that mixture, coming out of that evolution. Right? Once I do that, I have a new generation of materials. I can see if any of those outperform the parent generation. If they do, then they move right over here into the Hall of Fame, the list of fittest individuals ever lived. Right? And once we get a good list there, only then do we take that list to the lab and actually spend physical and material and time, labor resources on making those materials. So here's a quick example. This is the canonical example of genetic algorithms in action. And I know some of you in here have coded this by hand because you've worked with me, right? You've seen this in action. So let's say that instead of designing a new specialty top coat, or a new architectural latex paint, or a new low-TG copolymer, let's say instead you're just trying to get a bunch of zeros in a row. So you flip a coin 25 times, right? And you don't start with a list of zeros, you start with a list of zeros and ones. So you assign a score to that. You count the zeros. Well, and I have 25 digits here, so as long as my score is less than 25, I have a sub-optimized string of characters. So I enter my cycle of evolution, I breed, I mutate, I exchange these numbers randomly over and over and over and over, and what happens is the best, fittest strings of characters evolve until eventually you have a quote-unquote perfect material, 25 zeros. Right? We found it using natural evolution. Now we just have to do that with our materials. And of course, our materials are a lot more complicated than zeros and ones. But we've had some decent success with it, some interesting success. So here's an example of a command line interface program that one of my students wrote. And he was a computer science student, so he had to make it look like the Matrix. Right? He's doing it in the terminal. Right? So how this program runs is you name your polymer. You enter an ideal glass transition temperature. We were looking at optical properties here, so you enter a refractive index. We were also concerned with solubility and phase separation, so you enter a target solubility parameters, as well as surface energy. We run this optimization, and what you get is 3 different reaction mixtures taken to a certain degree of conversion, which I had to cover up here to protect some people, right? Would be expected to give us these properties. And this is a pretty simple example. We can do this with 10 or 20 or 30 properties at once. Now what's beautiful about this? Well, it's beautiful in that you don't get a deterministic single solution. Nobody ever wants one solution to their problem, right? That's human nature. The best business tip I got when I worked in industry is if you want to complain about a problem to your manager, make sure you have at least 2 solutions that you can live with, right? Right? So we like options. So here we get a list of multiple solutions presented to the user. They're sorted based on cost, material availability. Maybe you have production constraints or supply chain constraints, right? So you can sift through the best list of candidates to pick one that actually works for your business case. So these are examples, I think, of how we as an industry are adapting and evolving with the times. But what does it look like on the academic side of the fence? And this might be a strange way to kick off a conference that's largely focused on industry. But hopefully I think it will be entertaining to you to see how we frame this stuff in academic terms, and to see, hopefully, how classes and how coursework has changed since you were a student. I know it's certainly changed since I was a student, right? So how do we do this? Well, of course, we have our students work on research projects at different project scales. I've been really keen on having our students complete actually appropriate deliverables. We have them assess the state of the art, and my students in here know, you can talk to them, please students, be nice. I'm always changing my classroom structure and my assessment structure to kind of shake things up and make things operate more like the real world. And in a post or nearly post-COVID world, what discussion of teaching would be complete without talking about different learning modalities? So I'll give you a few examples of how we tackle that at Cal Poly. So Cal Poly's motto is learn by doing, and what that really means if you're a scientist is you learn science and research by actually doing science and research, right? So look, here's some students standing in this very ballroom, standing right there, right? In 2017, after the poster competition, they're happy because they just got some prize money. I'm happy because my students did well. Hey, look, I'm wearing the same tie. Charismatic academic, right? Wearing the same tie. Right? So we let our students do all sorts of research. Everything from 10-week projects in our graduate level courses. We had a student recently make an injectable hydrogel for biomedical applications. You could inject it through a syringe and then it would gel right up. Ongoing research with faculty. Billy Thompson is here right now. He still has his COVID hair. It looks great, right? Billy now works at EPS. He was a longtime student researcher with me on some industry-sponsored projects. And of course, some of the students here in attendance are here supported by their on-site internships. So we really think it's important to, of course, support thesis-type academic research, but also to get our students in position at industry sites doing long-term work. When I started working in academia after working in industry, one thing I noticed was that the deliverable system was a little outdated. I had students that were very, very good at making a lab report look like a journal article. How many of you have had to do that? You've had to make it, you've had to format it to look like a journal article. Yeah, but how many journal articles are you writing when you work in industry? And there's an editorial team that does the formatting for you, right? So the first thing I did in my graduate level polymer class was take away those boring lab reports and have students write deliverables that actually matter, right? Have them write executive summaries. What's an executive summary? That's something new. That's something that students don't do, right? You say, well, you need to give me a paragraph that gives me just enough information so I can read it and go into a meeting and not sound like a fool, right? I don't need a 10-page paper. I need an executive summary. What about a patent application, right? So we have students read patents. We have them look at the claims. We have them write their own claims. That's very different for a lot of students. They can go through 4 years of school, they can have a 4.0 GPA, but they've never looked at patent claims. Right? What about those year-end project reports that come with this wonky template that doesn't make sense? Right? I see heads nodding, and you have to fill out that template whether you like it or not, right? So we give students templates and say, you have to fill out this year-end project report, right? You have to really think about what the customer is and what's the impact of what you did. I've also been pretty careful and pretty cautious of assigning students projects that could actually have some impact in the real world. So an example of this is having students create computational tools and computational dashboards that they can share with the class and that the class can then use. So this is an example from Katie Lee, who's in the audience here. Right? It's tough to see here, but you don't need to see the actual code. Katie wrote some code that could tell you which reaction conditions you would need in order to create a surfactant with a certain hydrophile-lipophile balance. I said, that's awesome, right? That takes copolymerization, monomer pair reactivity ratios, HLB, it wraps it all up in code, and everybody else in the class can run it and can play with this code. So this is great. So our students are making deliverables that I'm actually proud to call deliverables, so that when they get to industry and you have them do deliverables, hey, they're turning in some quality work. Now, of course, it's also important to assess the field, right? To assess the field. So that doesn't just mean reviewing articles, but it means writing review articles, synthesizing that information. I think a lot of young people, they want to wait until they have a job in industry, until they actually consider themselves chemists. And of course, that's bogus. You're a chemist as soon as you start thinking about chemistry, right? So you should begin to synthesize information about chemistry once you're ready, right? Once you have a topic that you're interested in. So one of my favorite topics is to have students write review articles where they actually have to sift through literature and find 100, 200 articles, summarize them, look for common themes and trends, and then editorialize their own thinking and understanding on top of that topic. A lot of students aren't brave enough to do that at first. They say, I'm not an expert. How could I editorialize about this? Well, come on, how many of us are actually experts, right? You've got to get out on the limb eventually, right, and start telling the world what you think. So I encourage them to do that. Something that is a challenge to a lot of students is a change in overall classroom structure, which is happening slowly but surely across different disciplines and universities around the world. And that is this move to what's called flipped or inverted teaching, right? So flipped teaching means, how many of you have heard of flipped teaching or flipped classrooms? Just a few, right? If you have students in high school, they might have a physics or math class that's flipped. And so the idea here is the student's first introduction to the material is on their own, right? So I don't lecture. I give the students a book and I give them resources and I give them practice material and I say, here, become an expert. Be ready to be tested on it. Because that's what happens when you show up to work for the first day and you get a stack of old reports and you say, John retired, you're the new John. Oh, really? Okay, yeah, read his reports and hop into the meeting next week and you better have some good knowledge of what he did because you're going to design the next experiment. All right? So I have a classroom structure that encourages students to begin thinking that way. So how this happens is they'll sit with a book by themselves and they'll read the book. For many students, it's the first time they've ever had to read the book. Oh, I didn't know I actually had to read the book in this class. Yeah, you're going to start reading a lot of books as you get older and enter the workforce, right? Once they've read the appropriate sections in the book, they take what's called an individual and then they get happy. They take what's called an individual readiness assurance test. Every student takes their own 10-question multiple choice test. Now here's the real beauty. Then they get into teams. Right after that, 1 minute after that, they get into teams and they take the same test. They take the exact same test. Only now they can talk out their logic and their reasoning with their team. And they can debate with their team. Oh, well, I think the surface energy goes up. Well, I think it goes down. Wait, why do you think that? Oh, I just think I'm pretty smart. But no, I read the book and it's definitely going to go down. Right? So you see people talking about science, talking about these topics the way you do in the real world. Right? And you have to converge on an appropriate guess or answer for that problem. And guess what? If it's wrong, then you know it's wrong and you know who was wrong. Right? So it has a sort of level-setting effect, which tends to smooth out those rough egos, and it lets the people who are quiet but have really good ideas, it gives them confidence in sharing what they know. If there's any gaps, well then that's finally where I'll step in. I'll be the sage on a stage and I'll drop a knowledge bomb on them, but just a little bit, right? Just a little bit. I want them to be teaching themselves. After maybe a little tiny lecture, then in teams we'll work on what's called an application day. where you work on problems in class, and I'll give you an example of what that looks like. And then the finale for each module is a design day, where we have students actually design new materials given a list of specifications or requirements that I came up with. And the requirements might change on the fly, right? Like they do in the real world, right? So this classroom structure is very different than sit down, be quiet, listen to me, and then get tested in 5 weeks, right? That's not a very active way to learn. Nobody learns in that sort of passive fashion. So this is active, we're up, we're moving all the time. Another thing that is slowly changing in academia is this slow shift from percentage-based grading, which looks like this. Hey, you got it mostly right. You got an 82%. Yay, I got a B minus. Well, how often do you get grades in industry? I mean, you get performance reviews, right? But you don't get graded on your day-to-day work. Like I tell my students, you can either solve a photoelectric effect question, or like this, sorry student, you cannot, right? You don't get points for effort in the real world, right? You can either do it sufficiently or you can't, right? So a move to specification-based grading means you assign students problems and you mark them as either being correct or incorrect, period. And they're grading the classes based on how many corrects they rack up. I was pretty frustrated that a lot of students could partial credit their way to an A in the class, and they would not ever actually demonstrate one thing perfectly to me all quarter. That kind of hurt my heart, right? So this is also called mastery-based grading because it makes students actually master the topics that we want them to learn. What do students think about it? Well, here's some actual student feedback. It's hard to read that. So this is what it says. At first I hated this, but it honestly pushed me to learn more begrudgingly, thank you. Now, I think I know what they meant, right? I just got pages and pages of these comments. Oh, it was terrible. Oh, I hated it, but I'm actually better off for it at the end of the day. And that's what we want our students to do, right? That's what we want them to think. Okay? I mentioned integrating marketing and product development, and there's a way that you can do this at your industry sites, and there's a way that you can do it in classroom settings. It's by the use of design thinking. So how many people in here have run design thinking sprints in their organization? Oh my gosh. All right, I'm going to start a new consulting business today. Design thinking sprints at your company. Right? This is big in Silicon Valley. It's really big for designing apps. Because you can prototype an app in 10 minutes. Right? You can just sketch it out. Right? So design thinking starts by empathizing with the customer, or the user, or the potential customer. We all have customers. Right? We all have customers in this industry. You think about their needs. You think about their requirements. You only begin to come up with ideas for new products once you've thought about the customer's needs, right? So then you define those needs in terms of things that you can control, right? Oh, okay, I see. They want an anti-icing surface. Okay, so maybe I can control the morphology or the roughness of the surface, right? Then you begin to ideate. That's your buzzword for the day, ideation, right? You begin to come up with a bunch of ideas. Something that you learn the hard way is that brainstorming as a team doesn't work. And students love it when I tell them that because students don't like doing group work. Brainstorming as a team doesn't work. And you probably know that because there's one person who has all the best ideas in the world, right? And everybody else is just waiting for the meeting to get over with, right? So you ideate, you brainstorm on your own. Then you pool the team's ideas together and you start to sort and sift and look for patterns before you develop your prototype and you test the prototype. So this is what this looks like in my polymer synthesis class. I give my students a spec sheet. I'm the customer. I give my students a spec sheet that has a bunch of requirements and I say develop a polymer that does this. right? Develop a polymer for this application, develop a resin for this application. They have to put that into their own words, and then they have to brainstorm individually and then collectively to come up with a prototype, a synthesis plan. So this works very well. It keeps people active and moving, and it gets them used to working in a team where you might not traditionally think a team is required. But in the real world, in real industry problems, you're often working in teams like this. When it comes time for them to deliver their test plan to me, I have them put it in terms of what's called an IOOI analysis. Right? So what that is, that's input, output, outcome, and impact. Okay? This is a good way to sort of frame anything that you're doing or proposing at your organization. Most of us only think in terms of input and output. What am I putting in the reaction vessel? What did I get out? Right? Not many of us are thinking about outcome, short-term effects. Hey, now I have a new product that I can sell. Or impact, long-term effects. Hey, once this product enters the market, then we can expand out and we can kind of take over this corner of the space. Students definitely don't think about that. Most chemistry students think, oh, that's for business people to think about, right? But we need tighter integration between business and R&D and science and marketing sides, right? So framing what you do in terms of input, output, outcome, and impact gets students to start to think in those ways. Every now and then we get students that are highly ambitious and they say, hey, this is pretty great, I want to start my own company, right? Larry mentioned, in my word salad, a lot of multi-syllabic words in that bio. It wasn't intended to be read out loud. One of my roles on campus is as a faculty fellow in Cal Poly's Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which has a hothouse incubator off campus and a hatchery on campus solely meant for students that want to start their own companies. Right? So it's also a small business development center site so that they are locked into avenues of funding, SBIRs, SDTR grants, they get help writing grants, they get help with marketing, and we're really trying to make it easy for them to enter any sort of space as their own CEO of their own small company. And we're well positioned to do that, being halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is this variation of learning modality, right? Which either happens by force or by choice, right? Some of you are still probably working virtually by force. Maybe you're able to do it by choice and it's something that works out well for you. That's fantastic. At Cal Poly and at every university around the world, we were forced to go online pretty early, right? And in fact, we spent more than 4 academic terms teaching fully online, right? So there was a challenge. Well, how do you teach chemistry labs online? Yikes. You probably have to do this at your organizations. How do you train new people online? Okay, well, you get somebody to put a mask on, you let them go into the lab, they set up a GoPro, and they record themselves doing reverse impact test. Right? And then you watch that video. This is reverse impact test. Boom. Right there. Now you know how to do it. Right? For a long time, that's what was happening in the university. Right? Let's just have grad students go in and do the experiments, record it. We'll have our current students watch the videos. Oh, but that is just so crushingly boring. Right? And that's not a good way to learn anything. Right? So I was lucky enough to be able to team up with a group of computer scientists who helped me develop a set of virtual reality vignettes for my polymer synthesis class. So in an in-person lab, we would make these amphiphilic polyesters, and we would demonstrate that amphiphilic polyesters can be used to dissolve or solubilize dyes, both in water and in oily solvents. They would do this in person. Only last winter, they had to do it in a virtual reality lab. Right? That took a lot of effort, and it did not work perfectly, right? I'm not a software developer. I was working with a bunch of student computer science majors, but it was a nice change, and it was really thrilling and exciting to see that happen in our Zoom meetings. And so you've all seen on Twitter and on social media the panel, right? The Brady Bunch panel of Zoom meetings. Oh, here's my chemistry class. Oh, here's our year-end retreat. It's in Zoom. Well, this is what my Zoom meetings look like. Right? A bunch of students wearing 3D headsets, 3D virtual reality headsets that were paid for by a state grant. So thank you, California residents. Right? So here we are, adapting to changing times in real time, in virtual reality. Right? So what's the moral of the story? Right? That's a pretty good get off the stage chart. It's got students wearing virtual reality masks, they're happy, right? But we gotta put a bow on this whole discussion, right? And this is always the hardest part of a talk like this. So I see it this way: business needs encourage speed of science and innovation in the marketplace, right? Success loves speed. You gotta be moving faster and quicker, right? That's not necessarily working harder or working longer, but the cadence, the tempo has to be faster and quicker. So let this drive your reimagination of what industrial R&D and product development looks like. There's a lot of good examples of that happening right now, and my message to everybody in the room is you're early, right? You're early if you're still beginning to think about how to on-ramp some of these different reimagined ways of doing R&D. So before we kick off the conference here and you go to whichever track you've chosen to go to, I do want to acknowledge the WCS organizers and all the attendees for showing up. It's great to see everybody in person. I'd like to congratulate and also thank my colleague and friend Ray Fernando for some advice on this talk and for just being a great colleague to work with at Cal Poly. Cal Poly students, it sounds corny, but it's true. I couldn't be standing up here saying what I'm saying without Cal Poly students supporting the work, doing the research, and giving me feedback in my classes. I'm very happy to do my work at the Kenneth N. Edwards Western Coatings Technology Center, and of course, we'll keep it confidential, but many, many thanks to all the project sponsors who have kept me afloat these past few years. All right? So, of course, I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments. I'm easy to find online. You can send me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn. If you're ever in the San Luis Obispo area, driving from San Francisco to LA or vice versa, drop us a line and come by. We'll show you around. It'd be great to give you a tour. And most importantly, enjoy the show. Enjoy an actual in-person conference. Right? All right. Thank you very much.